Hi folks, Josh Wolfe with Wolfe Vintage Watches here. Welcome to my shop. In this video, I'll be servicing a Hamilton caliber 692 automatic movement from a 1961 Accumatic A-575 calendar. Let's get into it. This watch comes with a two-piece screw-down caseback. This ring here holds down the caseback and, along with the gasket, offers some water resistance. Speaking of the gasket, that is removed. Before taking out the movement, I'll remove the automatic works, rotor and all, to get it out of the way. Now I can remove the crown and stem by first loosening the setting lever screw. I'll try to remove just the movement ring, but as you can see, it just doesn't want to let go of the movement. So rather than fight it, everything comes out together. A little persuasion from my screwdriver and I can pry the movement ring free from the movement. Next I'll remove the dial by first loosening the dial feet screws. Alright, now I can remove the handset. Using a piece of plastic to protect from scratching the dial or the hands, I use hand levers to gently pry the hands off the hour wheel, canyon pinion, and pivot that they are pressure fit onto. And the dial is gently lifted away. I'll pop the acrylic crystal out of the case using my thumbs. Here I'm removing the white tension ring from the crystal. This ring pushes out against the walls of the crystal, giving it a tight friction fit into the case. Tightening up the dial feet screws here so they don't shake loose in the ultrasonic machine. Alright, starting from the dial side, I'll remove the hour wheel. The minute work cock is held in place by two tiny screws. The minute wheel is removed, followed by the setting wheel. One screw secures the date indicator guard, which retains the intermediate date wheel. The date indicator is removed, being careful not to send the date jumper or the spring into oblivion. Speaking of which, I'll snatch up the date jumper right now. Out comes the canyon pinion with driving wheel. I'll remove the date indicator driving wheel now. Moving on to the keyless works, the setting lever spring is held in place by a single screw. The setting lever can now be removed. Time to remove the yoke. I use a plastic pick to protect the yoke spring from launching itself into outer space as I gently wiggle the yoke free. It's a pretty tight tolerance on the post, so sometimes it can be difficult to remove. Keeping the plastic pick in place, I can now grab the yoke spring. The winding pinion is removed, followed by the clutch wheel. Last but not least, on the dial side, is the date jumper spring. Okay, now I need to let the mainspring down so I can get to work on the watchmaker side of the movement. I wind the ratchet wheel up just enough to move the crown wheel out of the way, and then let the remaining power down by letting the screwdriver slip between my fingers. As usual, the crown wheel screw is reverse threaded. The click can now be removed by taking out this screw. The click spring in this caliber is particularly small and I remove it very carefully. Now I can loosen and remove all of the bridge screws. To remove the barrel bridge, I get it started by prying it loose from its alignment pins with a screwdriver. Then I can snatch it up with my tweezers. Next to be removed is the crown wheel rocker. And lest I forget, I remove the setting lever screw. It's easy to forget to reinstall this little guy before fitting the barrel bridge, so do me a favor and don't let me forget to do that. Now I can remove the train wheel bridge, being careful not to break the pivots. First to come out is the sweep second wheel, followed by the third wheel, then the barrel, the intermediate wheel, and finally the escape wheel. To remove the top balance jewel and end stone, I carefully turn the brass shock absorber to lift it up one side. The jewel setting and the end stone come out together and will be cleaned separately. To make sure the shock absorber is not damaged, I secure it back into place. I then remove the balance and the balance cock together, making sure I don't disturb the very delicate hairspring. The pallet cock is removed by removing the screw and gently prying it off the two posts with the screwdriver, again making sure the pallet fork pivots are not damaged in this process. The pallet fork can now be removed. The bottom jewel setting for the escape wheel is capped, so I have to remove the cap to make sure everything is cleaned thoroughly. Now I can disassemble the automatic works. First to come off is the weighted rotor. I can move the brace out of the way to remove the reduction wheel. With the reduction wheel out of the way, I can remove the driving gear for the ratchet wheel. Again, I'll move the brace back into place to prevent any damage during the cleaning process. On the other side of the automatic framework are the pawl winding wheels. These wheels are held in place with a captured screw with half a head. The screw is turned out of the way to remove one of the wheels, then turned further to remove the other. To remove the mainspring, I use a small steel plate to push against the arbor until the cap pops off. Then using tweezers, I can work the arbor free from the end of the mainspring. Holding the mainspring in the barrel securely with my thumbs, I can walk it free from the barrel. Exciting stuff. How about we speed things along a bit? You can see how dirty and grimy this mainspring and barrel are. It was definitely past time for this guy to get a service. After a light cleaning to get most of the grease out of the barrel, I noticed a little dimple that was intruding that could interfere with the mainspring. Grabbing a flat stake and using a steel plate as a completely flat backer, I can gradually work the dimple out. I do this gradually with a couple of presses, checking the progress as I go. With that sorted, I run the parts through the heated ultrasonic cleaner and rinse. Now that all the parts have dried completely, I can wind the mainspring back into the newly flattened barrel. I have a set of vintage Watchcraft mainspring winders that work great. The small barb on the end of the post of the winding arbor fits into the end of the mainspring. This is then inserted into the handle, which can be wound back up. I apply pressure on the winding arbor as well as the handle with my left hand and keep the mainspring coils aligned as I wind the mainspring with my right. With attached bridle mainsprings like these, it takes a little extra effort to get them wound into the handle. To remove the winding arbor without pulling the mainspring out prematurely, I let the tension down and continue to turn the arbor backwards. This helps prevent any startling surprises from a mainspring uncontrollably uncoiling. You can see how tight the mainspring gets wound inside the handle here. Since this is an automatic, I need to apply some braking grease to the barrel walls. I like to use Novostar barrel grease here. That done, I take the handle and press it firmly into the barrel, trying to keep it from touching the walls. Once I'm certain the barrel and handle are lined up, I press down on the plunger, which pushes the wound mainspring into the barrel. A little lubrication on the barrel arbor before I work it into the end of the mainspring and the bottom barrel hole. Reinstalling the barrel arbor is one of those procedures that either goes super smoothly with no issues, or takes a lot more fiddling than it should. In this case, it went in nice and easy. And a bit more oil for the top of the arbor before refitting the barrel cap. If the cap is ajar, even just a little, it'll drag against the main plate, and you'll spend hours fault finding only to discover you're a bonehead and didn't squeeze the dang cap enough and you didn't need to disassemble, clean, and reassemble the train of wheels 4 times. Be that as it may, I can now install the cap jewel setting for the escape wheel. The observant will have noticed that I left the bottom balance wheel jewel in place. I do this to keep the bottom and top settings apart so I know which goes where. At this point, I'll remove and clean the bottom setting by hand. You can see the end stone comes off separate from the jewel setting, which doesn't always happen. After cleaning, I reassemble the components dry and install them back into the main plate. Now on the other side of the main plate, I'll lubricate these 2 settings. Auto oilers make oiling them a breeze. And now I can get on with reinstalling the training wheels, starting with the escape wheel, followed by the intermediate wheel. Then the third wheel is lined up with the pivot hole, making sure the teeth mesh with the intermediate wheel. I'll lubricate the extended pivot of the center sweep second wheel before inserting it through the center tube. And now I can work on getting the train wheel bridge refitted. There's really not much of a trick to getting this bridge back in place, but typically I can get 2 or 3 of the wheels to line up fairly easily. It's usually the escape wheel that is the last to line up. Applying very gentle pressure on the bridge, I make minute adjustments to the escape wheel to get the pivot to line up with its hole. I keep testing for free movement of the train before firmly pushing the bridge home. With free movement confirmed, I can screw the train wheel bridge down with 2 screws. Another test to see that beautiful spinning of the train of wheels. Here I'm oiling the bottom hole for the barrel arbor. I can wiggle the barrel into place and make sure it's seated properly and that the teeth are meshed and on the same plane. Setting the main plate aside, I can do some sub-assembly on the barrel bridge. First I'll fit the rocker arm, which is what the crown wheel attaches to. To keep it in place, I'll use some Rodico. With everything held steady and the bridge turned over, I'll lubricate the crown wheel post. Now I can install the crown wheel itself and secure it with its reverse threaded screw. The barrel bridge is installed, lining up the arbor hole and 2 alignment pins on the bottom. Some lubrication in the arbor hole, and then the bridge can be secured to the movement with 3 screws. With the entire train of wheels, including the barrel, installed and the bridges secured, I'll again test for free movement. I'll also check to see if the wheels continue to spin for a few seconds, indicating that there is very little friction, which of course is exactly what we want. It's time for the click spring and the click to be reinstalled. This click spring can be a bit of a pain to work with. It has a round profile and loves to fling itself into the watch part pit of despair that is my shop floor. Once I get it back in place successfully, the click can be refitted. I start with the click on top of the crown wheel and partially tighten the screw to keep everything aligned. Then I move the click into its final position and finish tightening the screw down. Manually rotating the crown wheel, I can confirm that the click assembly is working as it should. The ratchet wheel somehow magically appears and is secured with a screw. Using a plastic pick to hold the ratchet wheel steady, I tighten down the ratchet wheel screw. Now I can install the pallet fork. I need to line up the pallet pivot with the pivot hole, making sure that the pallet arm is between the 2 banking pins and that the pallet stones are on the same plane as the teeth of the escape wheel. Then I can refit the pallet cock into place. The 2 alignment pins need to line up with their respective holes and the pivot with its pivot hole before seating it completely. Some testing for free movement of the pallet along the way, and certainly before tightening down the screw. Here I can add a little wind to the mainspring to power the train of wheels. I want to see that power is transmitted smoothly all the way to the pallet. I'll now lubricate the exit stone on the pallet fork with a special grease made just for this purpose. And now to reinstall the balance assembly. Oh man, why didn't somebody tell me not to forget to install the dang setting lever screw? Shoot, well, there's nothing for it other than to partially disassemble the movement to get under the barrel bridge. Let's get that done at warp speed and pretend this never happened. Until it does again, inevitably. There, you little turd. As I was saying, I can now refit the balance cock and balance complete. I can work the balance wheel under the sweep seconds wheel, line the bottom pivot up with the bottom pivot hole, and make sure the impulse jewel is situated outside the pallet arm, and boom, we have a runner. I'll get the balance cock secured down with a screw to make sure nothing moves around. I can now lubricate and refit the top jewel setting and cap jewel. I find using an auto oiler the easiest way to place the right amount of oil on the end cap, but it's certainly possible to use a hand oiler as well. Through capillary action, the single greatest natural phenomenon, the setting and capstone suck together, which are then reinstalled into the balance cock. Here I am turning the brass shock to open it up to prepare for the top jewel. This tiny piece of brass is very delicate, and using the sharpest set of tweezers I have is usually the best way to manipulate it. And in goes the freshly lubricated jewel. After dropping the jewel setting back in place, I can close off the shock. Here I'm lubricating the pivots with my auto oilers. Now onto the dial side where I finish oiling the pivots. Here I'll start on the keyless works with the setting lever. I put it in place on the setting lever screw that you guys let me forget to put in the first go around, hold it with my fingertip, then partially screw it in. I like to get the setting lever situated first so I'm not flipping the main plate over and potentially dumping dial side parts all over. I'll now lubricate the winding pinion and clutch wheel with a little Mobius 9501 grease. Remember, when it comes to lubrication, less is usually more. Over-lubricating is far more damaging in the long run than under-lubricating. in goes the clutch wheel. And through this delightful shot of my stylish bangs, the winding pinion goes into place. I can now lubricate the facets of the stem, as well as the tip where it contacts the main plate. I also want to place a little grease in the groove where the post from the setting lever will ride. Again, it's easy to over-lubricate here, so I try to err on the side of caution. At this point, I can install the crown and stem into the movement. With those components all sorted, I'll finish tightening the setting lever screw down, that you guys let me forget to put in place on the first go-around. Now for the canyon pinion with driving wheel. I'll apply grease to where the two components are friction fit together so the time setting is smooth as well as to limit wear. This assembly is installed on the center tube. It can take some maneuvering to mesh the driving wheel with the third wheel. I'll turn my attention back to the keyless works and apply some grease to the groove that the yoke rides in on the clutch wheel. I'll also grease the post that the yoke pivots around. The yoke is fitted back into the movement now, making sure that it's riding in the groove of the clutch wheel. Here I'm lubricating between the setting lever and the yoke. Now I can get the yoke spring loaded back in. Wow, out of control bangs in the shot, my sausage fingers blocking any view of what I'm doing. I have a long way to go before Steven Spielberg comes knocking on my door looking for a director of cinematography. The setting lever spring is next to be reinstalled. This part keeps the rest of the keyless works in place as well as creates two positions for the crown. The setting lever spring is secured with just a single screw. I can now do some testing to make sure both positions of the crown are functioning properly. A little grease goes into the indices of the setting lever spring. And of course, cleaning up after myself as I go. Some heavy oil for the minute wheel and setting wheel posts. And now I can install the minute wheel and the setting wheel. The posts for the date indicator driving wheel and the intermediate date wheel are also lubricated with a tiny amount of oil before their respective wheels are dropped back into place. Here I'm installing the date jumper. This component puts pressure on the date indicator wheel, giving it that snap when the date is changed and stopping it so the numeral lines up with the date window on the dial. Now I can install the date jumper spring. This is a pretty strong spring, so it's best practice to use your bangs to stop it from disappearing if it slips out of your tweezers. Now I can place the date indicator wheel. Holding the jumper spring in place with a plastic pick, I pull the date jumper out of the way, which allows the date wheel to fall into place. The date indicator guard pulls triple duty. It holds the intermediate date wheel onto its post, it keeps the date indicator seated on one side of the movement, and it holds the jumper and spring in place. Here I'm wiggling the intermediate date wheel around to get it to line up with its post and for the teeth to mesh with the date indicator driving wheel. The guard is held securely with a single screw. The minute work cock can now be installed. Like the date indicator guard, this component holds the keyless works in place. These two screws are typically the smallest on the entire movement and are notorious for jumping into the fifth dimension. Alright, let's test the keyless works. Well, at least the time setting. Looks good. I don't have the hour wheel installed yet, so I have to manually rotate the date driving wheel to make sure everything is honky-dory there. Now I can work on getting the automatic works reassembled. I start with the automatic device framework, which all of the components will eventually attach to. After the retaining brace is moved out of the way, I lightly lubricate the posts for the ratchet wheel driving gear and reduction gear, which I can then refit. I'll close the brace and test for free movement. On the other side of the auto framework, I reinstall the two Paul winding wheels. These two wheels have an internal ratcheting mechanism that will wind the ratchet wheel in only one direction, regardless of which way the weighted rotor is spinning. Alright, now I can test for functionality again. Well, son of a gun, another unforced error. I installed the reduction gear upside down, so power is not being transmitted through all of the wheels. For the love of Pete. Geez, alright, back on track now. The screw for the weighted rotor is on the underside of the framework, so it'll need to be installed before refitting the entire assembly back onto the movement. A little lubrication for smooth operation, and I can tighten up the screw. After polishing up the crystal, I can reinstall the white tension ring. Then push the crystal back into the case. I'm not sure where the footage went, but I drove the crystal home with a crystal press. Before installing dial, I do a little cleanup to get the biggest pieces of shmoo off. I need to loosen the dial feet screws so the dial feet can be inserted into the movement. The last part of the movement to go on is the hour wheel. I make sure the teeth mesh with both the minute wheel and the intermediate date wheel. Lining up the date wheel at 3 o'clock with the stem and the hole with the hour wheel, the dial feet will find their respective holes. Then using gravity to hold the movement onto the dial, I'll tighten the dial feet screws back down. These press against the dial feet, securing the dial to the movement. Now I can advance the time to midnight to ensure that I installed the hands correctly. Just as the date wheel clicks over, I'll stop and install the hour hand with a hand press. Then I can install the minute hand exactly in line with the hour hand at the 12 o'clock marker. The minute hand is also driven home with a hand press. Here I'm checking for clearance and that the date advances close to midnight. Let's get that sweep second hand pressed back onto its pivot. And check again for clearance between all the hands. Looks good. A little final touch up to the dial and hands here. To install the dial and movement into the case, I need to first remove the crown and stem by loosening your favorite screw, the setting lever screw. I use a puffer to blow out any fuzzies that may have found their way onto the inside of the crystal. The movement ring is then fitted to the movement, making sure to align the notch for the stem with the hole in the side of the main plate. Now I can drop the whole thing into the case. Once everything comes back into focus, I can then push the movement ring home to make sure everything is seated fully. The crown and stem are reinstalled at this point. This will align the movement and the dial to the case. I have to be a little careful here not to push the clutch out from under the yoke. If I do that, I'll need to rebuild the keyless works, which is not something I'm interested in doing this close to the finish line. The part that shall not be named is tightened for a final time to secure the stem into the movement. I move the weighted rotor back and forth as I'm maneuvering the framework into place to make sure the ratchet wheel and the ratchet driving wheel's teeth are meshed. It's easy to think everything is aligned, only to crush teeth by screwing the auto works down. 2 final screws and the automatic works is now installed onto the movement. On a full wind, I'm going to give the watch an initial regulation. Using the regulator arm, I make minute adjustments to dial in the timing of the watch. Once I get it close to 0 seconds per day, I can then adjust the beat error by moving the adjustable stud holder. It's best to make an extremely small adjustment, watch for the change in beat error for several seconds, and then adjust further if needed. Also, I'm sure somebody more clever than I can come up with a good dad joke about the stud holder in the comments. Now let's get that gasket installed. I start by using some silicone grease to lubricate the plastic gasket before installing it back into the case. The case back is then placed onto the gasket. The screw-down retaining ring is then hand-tightened to hold the case back in place. It's tightened up with a case wrench, completing the service of this 1961 Hamilton Accumatic A-575 calendar. It's a sharp little watch with concentric grooves on the dial and a record finish. The framed date window at the 3 o'clock is a nice little detail, and the applied numerals and indices are great too. I mean, how could you not love a vintage, Swiss-made, automatic stainless steel Hamilton with a date complication and a domed acrylic crystal? To see my other service and restoration videos, click on the playlist on the left. Or you can go down a YouTube rabbit hole by clicking on the video on the right. Whichever direction you choose, please consider subscribing and drop a like if you found this video informative or at least entertaining. Be sure to leave your comments and questions below, and I'll do my best to respond. As always, thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye.